When AOC stood up to respond to Warren's brutal attack, the Senate chamber went dead silent. What she said next became the most watched political clip of 2025. The Senate Finance Committee chamber buzzed with the usual pre-hearing energy on that crisp Tuesday morning in March 2025. Senators shuffled through briefing papers, aides whispered last-minute updates, and C-SPAN cameras focused on the mahogany-paneled room that had witnessed countless political battles. But today felt different. The air carried an electric tension that made even the most seasoned political observers lean forward in their seats. At the far end of the committee table sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, now in her fourth term and serving on the Finance Committee for the first time. Her burgundy blazer was perfectly pressed, her hair pulled back in a professional bun, and her expression carried the focused intensity of someone who knew she was walking into hostile territory. At 35, she'd evolved from the young firebrand who'd shocked the political establishment to a formidable legislator, but today she was about to face her biggest Senate challenge yet. Across the room, Senator Elizabeth Warren reviewed her notes with the methodical precision of a former Harvard law professor preparing for the most important lecture of her career. At 76, Warren commanded respect through decades of fighting Wall Street, dismantling corporate executives in hearings, and building a reputation as the progressive movement's intellectual backbone. Her silver hair caught the committee room lights as she adjusted her reading glasses, and the thick folder in front of her suggested she'd come prepared for war. The hearing's official topic was tax policy and economic inequality in post-pandemic America, but everyone in the room knew this was really about something much more personal: the future direction of the Democratic Party, and whether the torch would pass from Warren's generation to AOC's. But what Warren didn't know about AOC was that she'd spent the previous 3 years quietly building alliances, studying Warren's own tactics, and preparing for exactly this moment. The tension had been building for months. Warren had grown increasingly frustrated with what she saw as AOC's tendency toward viral moments over substantive policy work. In private conversations with colleagues, Warren had reportedly called AOC's approach Instagram activism and worried that the younger Congresswoman's social media savvy was overshadowing the serious legislative work needed to address economic inequality. AOC, for her part, had grown tired of being patronized by the Democratic establishment. She'd proven herself as more than a Twitter personality, shepherding significant legislation through committees and building coalitions that even her critics had to respect. But Warren's continued dismissiveness stung, particularly because AOC had once considered the Massachusetts senator a mentor. The breaking point had come 2 weeks earlier, when Warren gave an interview to The Atlantic, suggesting that some younger progressive lawmakers were more interested in likes than laws. Though she hadn't mentioned AOC by name, everyone understood the target. AOC's response had been swift and cutting, a tweet that simply said, "When you assume someone's commitment to justice based on their age instead of their record, you're part of the problem you claim to be solving." The exchange had lit up political Twitter and cable news, with pundits debating whether this represented a healthy ideological discussion or a destructive generational divide within the progressive movement. Today's hearing would settle the question. As committee chairman Bernie Sanders called the hearing to order, the packed gallery fell silent. Reporters adjusted their cameras, knowing they might be witnessing a historic confrontation. Warren was scheduled to question the Treasury Secretary about tax enforcement, but everyone suspected she had a different target in mind. "The chair recognizes Senator Warren for 5 minutes, Sanders announced, his Vermont accent cutting through the chamber's hushed atmosphere. Warren stood slowly, her movements deliberate and commanding. She'd built her reputation by methodically dismantling opponents with facts, logic, and moral authority. Today would be no different. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Warren began, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that made the room tense. "I want to talk about the serious business of governing, about the unglamorous work of actually passing legislation that helps working families, instead of just talking about it." Her eyes swept the room before landing directly on AOC. "We're living in serious times that require serious solutions, not social media strategies." The attack was subtle but unmistakable. Warren continued, pulling out a thick binder of documents. "Some people think governing is about getting the perfect soundbite or the most retweets, but real change happens in committee rooms, in late-night negotiations, in the detailed work of writing bills that can actually pass." AOC's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her could see the slight tightening around her eyes. Warren wasn't finished. "I've been fighting corporate power for decades," Warren continued, her voice gaining strength. "Long before it was trendy, long before it got likes on social media. And I've learned that change requires more than clever tweets or viral videos. It requires understanding how power actually works in this town." What Warren said next shocked everyone in the room. "Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned that some members of this committee seem to think that progressive politics is about performance rather than results. We can't afford naive and dangerous approaches that prioritize viral moments over the serious work of governing. The American people deserve better than Instagram activism." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Warren had just called AOC naive and dangerous in front of the entire Senate Finance Committee, on live television, with cameras rolling and reporters scribbling furiously. The attack was unprecedented in its directness, coming from someone who was supposed to be on the same side. AOC's supporters in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the respectful disagreement they'd expected, but a full-scale character assassination designed to undermine everything AOC had built over 6 years in Congress. Senator Sanders looked stunned by the breach of committee decorum. Even Warren's allies seemed surprised by the directness of her attack. The Massachusetts senator had just crossed a line that would reshape progressive politics for years to come. But Warren wasn't done. She pulled out a prepared statement, her voice carrying the moral authority that had made her a progressive icon. Some members talk about revolution, but revolution without strategy is just chaos. Some members talk about fighting the system, but if you don't understand the system, you can't change it. She gestured toward her thick binder of policy proposals. I've spent my career building the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, fighting predatory lending, and actually passing legislation that helps working families. That's not as exciting as a tweet that gets 1 million likes, but it's what governing actually looks like. The room was completely silent now, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Warren had just delivered the most devastating public attack on AOC's credibility in her congressional career, questioning not just her methods but her fundamental competence as a legislator. Everyone expected AOC to crumble under the weight of Warren's decades of experience and moral authority. After all, this was Elizabeth Warren, the woman who had made corporate CEOs squirm, who had built a reputation as an uncompromising fighter for economic justice. AOC was being lectured by progressive royalty in front of a national audience, but the most devastating moment was yet to come. AOC sat quietly during Warren's attack, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression giving nothing away. When Warren finally finished, and Chairman Sanders asked if any other committee members had questions, AOC slowly raised her hand. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respond to Senator Warren's comments, if I may." Sanders nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the unprecedented nature of the exchange. "The chair recognizes Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez." AOC stood up slowly, smoothing her blazer. The Senate chamber was so quiet that the click of her heels echoed as she stepped forward to the microphone. She looked directly at Warren, her dark eyes steady and unflinching. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, she said nothing. The silence was deafening. Cameras zoomed in on her face, catching the slight smile that played at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't the nervous smile of someone who'd been caught off guard, but the confident expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. When AOC finally spoke, her voice was clear, measured and devastatingly calm. "Senator Warren, with all due respect, I think you've confused experience with wisdom." The words hit the chamber like a thunderclap. Warren's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting such a direct counterattack. AOC continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You talk about the serious work of governing, but you just spent 5 minutes attacking a colleague instead of focusing on the American families this committee is supposed to serve. You want to talk about naive and dangerous? Let's talk about the danger of a politics so focused on maintaining institutional respect that it forgets why we're here." She pulled out her own folder, considerably thinner than Warren's but organized with precision. "You're right that I use social media, Senator, because that's where the American people are. While you've been having closed-door meetings with bank regulators, I've been talking directly to the workers whose wages haven't kept up with inflation, the students drowning in debt, the families choosing between rent and groceries." The gallery began to murmur. This wasn't the defensive response anyone had expected. AOC was going on offense. "You built the CFPB and that was important work," AOC continued, her tone respectful but firm. "But you built it within a system that's fundamentally broken. You regulated the banks while the banks got bigger. You fought predatory lending while wealth inequality reached historic levels. You played by the rules while the rules were rigged against working people." Warren's face was stone, but her hands gripped her pen tightly. AOC stepped closer to the microphone, her voice carrying a passion that made the room electric. "You want to talk about revolution versus strategy? I'll give you strategy. While you've been trying to reform a system from the inside, I've been building a movement that doesn't ask permission from the people who broke that system in the first place." She opened her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a list of the legislation I've authored or co-authored that's been signed into law in the past 3 years. Climate investments that created jobs in Senator Warren's own state. Worker protection bills that passed because we built grassroots pressure that made opposition politically impossible. Immigration reform that moved through Congress because we made the human cost impossible to ignore." The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "You call it Instagram activism," AOC said, her voice rising slightly. "I call it meeting people where they are. You want serious politics? Here's what's serious. Explaining complex policy in ways that don't require a Harvard degree to understand. Making the stakes clear to people who've been told politics doesn't matter to their lives. building movements that don't disappear when the cameras turn off. What happened next broke the internet. AOC paused, letting her words sink in. Then she delivered the line that would be quoted, memed and analyzed for years to come. "Senator Warren, you spent your career asking the system to be better. I'm not asking anymore. I'm demanding it, and if it won't change, I'm replacing it. That's not naive. That's the future knocking on the door of the past." The chamber erupted. Warren's face flushed red. Sanders banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. But AOC wasn't finished. And as for dangerous, AOC's voice cut through the chaos with laser precision. "The only thing dangerous here is politicians who think experience means never being challenged, never evolving, never admitting that maybe, just maybe, the old ways of doing things aren't working anymore." She gathered her papers with deliberate calm. "I respect your service, Senator Warren. I learned from your example. But respectfully, I'm not you. I'm not trying to be you. And the movement I represent doesn't need your permission to exist." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed to file stories. Social media lit up with real-time reactions. Warren sat frozen, clearly unprepared for such a comprehensive dismantling of her attack. AOC returned to her seat as if she'd just ordered coffee, not delivered one of the most devastating political responses in recent memory. The hearing continued for another 30 minutes, but nobody was paying attention to tax policy anymore. Within an hour, clips of AOC's response were trending on every social media platform. The phrase "I'm not asking anymore" became an instant meme. Progressive activists shared the video with comments like, "This is what fighting back looks like." Even conservative commentators grudgingly admitted it was a masterclass in political theater. Warren, for her part, attempted to regain control by returning to her prepared questions about tax enforcement, but the damage was done. She'd tried to diminish AOC, and instead had elevated her to a new level of political stardom. By evening, the full exchange had been viewed over 10 million times across platforms. Political analysts called it a generational changing of the guard. The hashtag #FutureKnocking trended globally, but the real impact wasn't measured in views or hashtags. AOC had done something unprecedented. She'd stood up to the progressive establishment and won. Not through compromise or deference, but through the sheer force of articulating a vision that transcended traditional political categories. In the days that followed, the political landscape shifted measurably. Progressive organizations began reaching out to AOC's team for endorsements. Fellow young lawmakers reported increased confidence in challenging senior members. Warren's fundraising took a hit while AOC's exploded. More importantly, the exchange crystallized something that had been building for years: the sense that American politics needed not just new policies, but entirely new approaches. AOC had articulated what millions of Americans felt but couldn't express: that the old ways of doing politics, even progressive politics, weren't adequate to the crises they faced. Warren, to her credit, eventually reached out privately to AOC for a conversation. According to sources close to both offices, it was cordial but didn't fully heal the rift. The ideological differences that had sparked the conflict remained. But AOC had achieved something more valuable than Warren's approval. She'd established herself as a leader who couldn't be dismissed, condescended to, or controlled by the political establishment. Her response to Warren's attack had been so complete, so devastating, that even her critics had to acknowledge her political skill. The Senate hearing that was supposed to destroy AOC's credibility instead launched her into a new stratosphere of political influence. She'd proven that she could hold her own against any opponent, using any forum, on any stage, and she'd done it not by playing by the old rules, but by rewriting them entirely. The morning after the hearing, AOC received a text from an unexpected source: former President Obama. "Watched the hearing. Impressive work. The future is in good hands." But perhaps the most telling reaction came from a simple tweet that went viral overnight, posted by a high school student in Warren's home state of Massachusetts. "Just watched @AOC destroy my senator, and honestly, it's about time someone did." The generational torch hadn't just been passed, it had been claimed.